At exactly 9:12 on a rainy Tuesday morning, Elena Rahman signed the most important document of her life with a pen that kept slipping between her fingers because she couldn't stop thinking about the coffee stain on the sleeve of her only blazer. It was ridiculous, really worrying about a stain while sitting inside a quiet legal office where her entire future was being rewritten line by line. But her brain refused to process the seriousness of marriage. When she had spent the last 4 years calculating bus fares and postponing dentist visits, the lawyer spoke in calm, polished sentences, flipping pages with practiced precision, occasionally pausing to explain clauses she barely understood. Shared assets, liability protections, financial independence provisions. She nodded each time, not because she understood, but because Karim had squeezed a hand gently under the table and whispered earlier, "It's just standard paperwork. My family insists it doesn't change us." And she believed him. She believed him because Karim was the only man who had ever remembered how she took her tea, who noticed when she skipped meals, who waited outside her office every Thursday evening simply to walk her home, even though he lived in the opposite direction. A man like that did not feel dangerous. A man like that did not feel complicated. Felt safe. So she signed where the tabs were marked, the pen scratching softly across thick paper, never noticing the brief glance the lawyer exchanged with Karim, a glance heavy with information she did not possess. The air outside smelled of wet asphalt and jasmine from the small garden across the street. Elena shivered, tugging her blazer tighter, wondering how she could feel this light and heavy at the same time. Heavy with the gravity of signing her life into another's hands. Yet light because Karim's presence seemed to tether her anxieties, smoothing them out like sunlight across a rippling pond. She imagined the words of the lawyer etched into memory, though she barely registered them. Joint property, separate assets, prenuptial clauses. It was a map she did not understand, yet one she trusted would not mislead her, because Karim's hand in hers had become the only compass she needed. Their wedding, 3 days later, was deliberately small, almost defiantly ordinary. She refused a hotel ballroom. She refused photographers with drones. She refused chandeliers, orchestras, ice sculptures, and everything else Karim gently suggested might make it special. Instead, they married in a courtyard, behind her aunt's modest house, where jasmine vines clung to cracked walls and plastic chairs wobbled on uneven tiles. A thin drizzle fell, soaking the edges of her hem, but she barely noticed. Karim never argued, not once. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no watch, no visible brand labels, nothing that hinted at wealth. He laughed easily with her cousins, helped carry food trays, and ate with his sleeves rolled up like he belonged there. If anyone had told her that the quiet man stacking empty plates beside the sink owned more property than the entire neighborhood combined, she would have laughed out loud and asked them to stop watching dramatic television shows. Yet in that ordinary, rain-speckled courtyard, nothing seemed dramatic. Nothing seemed like it could conceal a universe of secrets. Their first apartment was hers, a cramped one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled permanently of fried onions and old newspapers. Karim moved in with 2 suitcases and no complaints. She warned him about the water heater that required kicking twice to function, the balcony door that jammed in humid weather, and the upstairs neighbor who vacuumed at 2 a.m. He smiled like these inconveniences were charming adventures instead of problems money could easily erase. Every morning, he left for work wearing simple shirts and carrying an unbranded leather bag she assumed held a laptop and documents. When she asked what exactly he did, he would answer vaguely. Consulting, mostly meetings. Nothing exciting. She accepted it because adults rarely loved their jobs anyway. She worked long shifts at a small publishing office proofreading manuals, and their evenings were ordinary grocery shopping, cooking lentils, arguing over which movie to watch, sharing the fan during power outages. For 6 months, life stayed beautifully predictable. She began to think perhaps love itself was ordinary quiet, repetitive, fond. She liked it that way. The first crack appeared on a Thursday evening when a black car waited outside her office. Not just any car, the kind with tinted windows and a driver who stepped out before Karim even opened the door. She froze halfway down the stairs, thinking she must have misidentified him. But then Karim looked up, startled, as if he'd been caught doing something mildly embarrassing rather than massively suspicious. "It's temporary," he said quickly before she could speak. Client insisted on sending transportation after late meetings. She felt uneasy but nodded because she didn't want to be the paranoid wife. Still, that night she noticed the cufflinks he forgot to remove, small silver rectangles heavier than they looked, and the faint scent of a cologne she knew they could never afford. She told herself she was imagining things, yet the seed of doubt, once planted, gnawed quietly, making her notice the smallest inconsistencies. Tea receipts they accidentally left behind, the whispers during phone calls, the subtle unease in his eyes whenever she pressed him for details. 2 weeks later, she accidentally opened a package delivered to their apartment addressed only with their last name. Inside was a watch in a velvet box. Not a normal watch. Even she, who knew little about luxury, understood this was the kind people photographed, not wore casually. Karim returned home, saw it in her hands, and for the first time since she met him, he hesitated before speaking. A full 3 seconds. "It belongs to a client," he said. "Left it during a meeting." She didn't argue, but doubt settled quietly into her chest, heavy and patient. That night, she lay awake, imagining boardrooms, high-rise windows, and people she had never met, wondering who the man she married really was. The truth revealed itself violently, not gently. It happened when she visited his office unannounced because she wanted to surprise him with lunch after receiving her first salary bonus. The address he had given her led not to a normal building but to a towering glass headquarters with a security gate. She thought she had the wrong place until the guard greeted her by name before she even spoke. By name. Her stomach tightened. Inside, the receptionist stood immediately. "Mrs. Rahman, he's expecting you upstairs." Expecting? He wasn't. She hadn't called. Elevators required key cards she didn't have, yet one opened automatically. On the top floor, doors slid apart into an office larger than her entire apartment. Karim stood beside a wall of windows overlooking half the city, mid-conversation with men in suits who fell silent when she entered. Nobody looked surprised except him. No dramatic confession came. No cinematic music, just silence, stretching long enough for reality to settle into shape. She placed a lunch container on his desk slowly and asked the simplest question her brain could form. "What is this place?" Karim dismissed everyone, closed the door, and looked at her with the same gentle expression he'd always worn, only now it felt terrifying. "I wanted to tell you after the wedding," he said quietly. "Then, after we settled, then after you trusted me enough that the money wouldn't matter." Her heartbeat roared in her ears. "Matter?" she whispered. "What money?" He exhaled, once. "All of it. The company. The properties. The investments. I didn't lie about loving you. I lied about the scale of my life." She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just remembered the contract she signed, the one she never read, and suddenly understood why every clause protected him, not them. The marriage contract she signed without knowing she was marrying one of the wealthiest men in the region. The realization didn't feel like winning a lottery. It felt like discovering the ground she stood on had been rented all along. The apartment she thought was simple. The dates she thought were ordinary. The conversations she cherished, they had been carefully orchestrated to shield her from a reality that might have scared her away. For days, she moved through their apartment like a guest. Every object became suspicious. The chipped mug he loved, was it staged? The cheap mattress intentional? Had their entire relationship been a carefully controlled environment designed to test her authenticity? He answered every question honestly once the truth broke open, explaining he had spent years watching people change when they learned who he was. Friends became investors. Dates became negotiations. Families became proposals. He wanted someone who loved his quiet, not his influence. So he hid it, legally. Completely. The contract ensured she would never feel pressured or trapped by wealth, but ironically, it trapped her trust instead. She left him a week later. Not dramatically, just packed clothes and went to her aunt's house. He didn't stop her, only asked softly, "Would you have married me if you knew?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Love built on missing information is not a lie, but it isn't truth either. Their relationship had no script, and for the first time, she realized that people could love the right person for the wrong reasons, and that trusting someone without all the facts is an act of bravery rather than foolishness. Weeks passed. He never used money to persuade her back. No gifts, no grand gestures, only handwritten letters. Human letters, describing ordinary things he missed. Her complaints about bus drivers, the way she organized books by color instead of genre, how she hummed unconsciously while cooking. He described board meetings and legal disputes too, finally letting her see the real world he carried alone. She realized the billionaire had been hiding not power, but exhaustion. He hadn't feared losing money, he feared losing normal life. When she finally returned, it was by choice, stepping into the same modest apartment, noticing the small details she had once loved. The crooked picture frame in the hallway, the stack of newspapers on the coffee table, the faint smell of cumin in the kitchen that reminded her of her grandmother's house. But this time something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just returning to him, she was returning with awareness. Awareness of the life he carried behind closed doors. Awareness of the silence he had once chosen over honesty. Awareness of the fact that love, no matter how genuine, had to survive truth not avoided. And as she stepped inside, she realized she was no longer the same woman who had left. She smiled at him, half shy, half triumphant, and he smiled back. Not the CEO, not the mysterious billionaire, but the man she'd fallen in love with before any of it existed. Over the next months, their life became a careful negotiation between extremes. Not forced, not scripted, but deliberate. Intentional. She demanded honesty. He gave full disclosure, not just surface-level explanations, but uncomfortable truths. Numbers, decisions, consequences. She insisted on normalcy. He kept routines he could not abandon without consequence. And somewhere between those two demands, they built something new. Not the illusion of simplicity, but a version of reality they could both live with. They cooked meals together while discussing corporate strategy. They grocery shopped while reviewing spreadsheets. Sometimes she would pause mid-aisle, holding a packet of rice, while he explained a merger worth more than everything in that store combined. And the contrast made her laugh, because for him, it was numbers. For her, it was perspective. Ordinary moments became extraordinary because they were shared. The first time she saw the scale of his empire, he guided her without intimidation, showing her floors of offices, research labs, and servers, while describing them as though he were taking her on a tour of a library, not a multinational AI conglomerate. But what struck her most wasn't the size. It was the silence. Hundreds of people working, thousands of decisions being made. And yet, when he spoke, they listened, not out of fear but precision. That was when she realized power wasn't loud, it was controlled. She asked questions. He answered. She asked about morality. He paused and answered. Not quickly. Not perfectly. But honestly. And sometimes, that honesty came with uncertainty. She asked about love. And he finally admitted genuinely that hiding his wealth had been the one lie he thought would protect them. It wasn't simple after that, because knowing the truth didn't erase the past. It reframed Italiano. Boardrooms still demanded his time. Shareholders still expected perfection. Competitors still underestimated nothing. But in their apartment, they rebuilt a marriage untainted by deception. Not by forgetting what happened, but by choosing not to let it define everything. There were nights he came home late, exhausted, sitting quietly at the edge of the bed, not speaking. And instead of asking questions, she would sit beside him, not as someone waiting for answers, but as someone who understood silence. He began leaving her notes in her handbag. Reminders, jokes. Fragments of poems he never completed. She left small surprises in his briefcase. Biscuits, handwritten reflections, tiny sketches she drew while bored at work. Some notes were simple. Don't skip lunch. Others were strange. I saw a street vendor today and thought of you, and some were vulnerable. I don't know how to be both people at once, but I'm trying. They learned to inhabit each other's worlds without losing themselves, to inhabit luxury without letting it define them, to inhabit marriage without letting history define it. And then came the media. At first, it was small. A mention here, a photograph there, speculation wrapped in curiosity. The first morning, she opened a newspaper to find a front-page photo of Karim. Entering a charity gala, his face calm, his posture flawless, and a headline shouting his net worth like it was a scandal. The article hinted at secret acquisitions, investments in foreign tech startups, and an estimated fortune that made her entire life feel microscopic. Her stomach lurched, and for the first time in months, she wondered whether returning had been the right choice. Not because she doubted him, but because she now understood the world that came with him. A world that didn't ask permission. Karim, seeing her pale face, only held a hand. "I never promised the world would remain ignorant," sighed softly. "Only that I would remain me." And somehow, that made it tolerable, because she realized something important in that moment. He couldn't control the world, but he could control how he showed up in it. And so could she. Public curiosity grew. Friends whispered, colleagues gawked, neighbors speculated. Some treated her differently, too carefully. Others treated her like opportunity, too eagerly. Invitations to galas and corporate events poured in, and every invitation came with expectation. The world wanted to see the billionaire's bride, not the woman who had baked lentil soup, argued over fan settings, and folded laundry alongside him. She found herself standing in glittering rooms, strangers staring at her hand, her ring, her aura, expecting her to be polished, composed, luxurious. At first, she felt like an outsider, like she had walked into a story that wasn't hers. But then she realized something. None of them knew her. Not really. And that gave her freedom. Freedom to choose how she existed in that world. Not as a reflection of him but as herself. But in those moments, she caught Karim's gaze, full of grounding calm, and remembered the courtyard, the drizzle, the plastic chairs that had once defined their first wedding. And that memory anchored her. It was a delicate balancing act. Not between rich and poor, but between perception and reality, between expectation and identity. Social expectations pressed her toward a life she never asked for. Yet she and Karim carved a private world within it, a world that didn't need to prove anything. She learned to navigate his society events without losing her essence. She spoke when she wanted, listened when she needed, and walked away when it no longer felt real. He introduced her not as an accessory to wealth, but as a partner. Someone whose opinions mattered, whose voice could challenge his own, whose laughter could disarm the stiffest boardroom. And slowly, people began to see it. Not just who he was, but who she was to him. They laughed privately about tabloids, about rumors of extravagant shopping sprees they never took, about the absurdity of the world assuming happiness could be bought. Because if that were true, they would have never struggled, never questioned, never rebuilt anything. And without that, none of this would matter. A year later, when the city celebrated the new year with fireworks she once thought gaudy and unimportant, she stood on their balcony, leaning against him as he held her close, listening not to the explosions, but to the quiet rhythm of the man who had once been untouchable. She whispered, "I signed a contract without knowing you were a billionaire." He kissed her forehead. "And yet you stayed." She laughed softly. "I stayed because you were just you." He smiled, watching the sunrise over towers that now seemed insignificant. "I hid everything," he said, "except what mattered most." She tilted her head. "And that was me." He nodded. Always you." From that moment, wealth became incidental. Not irrelevant, but secondary. Background noise to something far more valuable. At first, that shift was subtle, almost invisible. Nothing dramatic changed overnight. There was no grand turning point, no sudden transformation, just small adjustments, quiet decisions, the kind that reshape a life without announcing themselves. And Elena began to notice them. He started coming home earlier when he could. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Meetings that once stretched endlessly into the night were shortened. Calls that could wait did, and in those reclaimed hours, they built something ordinary, something real. They would sit on the balcony with tea, saying nothing, letting the silence exist without pressure. Sometimes she would talk about her day. Small things, a typo she caught, a colleague who annoyed her, a book she couldn't stop thinking about, and he would listen like it mattered more than any boardroom discussion. Because to him, it did. It grounded him, reminded him that life wasn't just decisions measured in millions, but moments measured in meaning. And slowly, she began to understand something else. Wealth didn't disappear. It didn't shrink. It didn't fade. It simply stopped being the center of their story and became the background of it. The skyscrapers outside, the boardrooms, the meetings, the legal battles, all were just backdrop to a marriage built on transparency, vulnerability, and the quiet courage to choose each other despite everything unknown. And Elena realized something she hadn't understood before. Trust is not built in perfect conditions. It is built in uncertainty. It is built in the pauses between answers, in the moments where you could walk away but choose not to. And sometimes, the strongest relationships are not the ones that start with truth, but the ones that survive its absence, because survival requires choice. Repeatedly, every day, in ways both small and significant. There were still difficult days, days when the weight of his world crept back in, when headlines were harsh, when decisions carried consequences that reached far beyond them. On those days he became quieter, more distant, not intentionally but inevitably, and she learned not to take it personally. Instead, she would leave a note on the table. Simple, I'm here. Nothing more. And that was enough, because presence mattered more than solutions. There were also moments when she struggled, when the scale of his life still felt overwhelming, when standing in rooms filled with power and expectation made her question where she belonged. And on those days, he reminded her, not with words, but with consistency. The same man who stood in those rooms was the one who made tea in their kitchen. The same man who negotiated billion-dollar decisions was the one who laughed when she burned dinner. And that duality stopped feeling like a contradiction and started feeling like truth. Months turned into years, and what once felt fragile became steady. Not perfect but resilient. They built routines that no one saw. Private rituals, Friday dinners with no phones, Sunday mornings with no plans, walks through streets where no one recognized them, moments where they could just exist, not as symbols, not as headlines, but as two people who had chosen each other, fully aware of what that choice meant. And over time, Elena noticed something else. He no longer hid parts of his life, not from her, not from himself. The separation between his worlds began to dissolve.